This happened in my junior year of college, and I've never forgotten a moment of it since. It's been nearly a decade since this all went down, since I changed universities, moved 2 towns and then eventually an entire state over, and spent the whole time trying to scrub these events from my mind. Of course, to no avail, every second of it is fresh like it was yesterday. In my junior year, I had been attending the University of Oklahoma as a biology major. I had wanted to go for pre-med, but felt like I wasn't ready to lose the ability to both be in school and still get blackout drunk most nights. I wasn't very smart in other aspects of my life, but that's neither here nor there. My girlfriend's name was Caddy. We met in our sophomore year at some coffee shop a little way off campus. I wouldn't really say we had a meet cute, considering I nearly took her eye out with the front end of my pen while she was walking by my little table. Of course, her eye had remained intact and I had spent nearly half an hour apologizing and even offered to buy her a latte or whatever she drank to make up for it. Really? I just wanted to keep talking to her. Caddy was easygoing and unshamingly flirtatious, and she sat with me and sipped some non-fat coffee drink that was all milk and no coffee. From there, it had been like clockwork, a whirlwind college romance story that featured coffee dates and a lot of missed classes. After almost a year together, Caddy had moved in with me at my apartment and made it hers. I didn't mind, obviously. I just wanted to spend all my time with her. And in case you were wondering, the thought of being pre-med hadn't crossed my mind in months. In fact, I was slacking so hard in my studies that my scholarship was barely hanging on by a thread. Caddy was like no other girl I'd ever met before. And believe me, I know how that sounds. Like I'm a love-struck idiot that falls hard and fast for the first girl to give me any kind of attention. I swear it wasn't like that, but in hindsight, I don't think I even knew what it was. I just knew Caddy and I were meant to be together. I haven't told you what Caddy looked like, and maybe it's because after all these years, I'm still too selfish to share her with anyone. She had this olive skin that put my own milky complexion to shame, and dark hair that stopped at the small of her back, always curly and smelling like peaches. She was intoxicating. But what I loved most about Caddy were her eyes. They were a brilliant blue and shone in the dark, almost piercing if she fixed you with the right or wrong look. It was hard to take her seriously sometimes, during fights or arguments, when she looked at me with a glare meant to kill. All I saw was my Caddy, ocean-eyed and beautiful. It wasn't almost until 8 months into our relationship that Caddy let me in on her big secret, that she wore colored contacts. She said she'd been afraid to tell me because of how much I loved her eyes. I smiled and told her she was ridiculous. Of course, I loved her eyes, but they weren't that important to the grand scheme of things. I loved her because of who she was, how kind and warm she was. She lit up when I told her I didn't care what color her eyes were, and she kissed me, batted her colored eyes at me a few times, and then kissed me again. After that, I noticed that she would switch her contacts out a lot. Most days she would stick with blue, but some days they were a gorgeous gemstone green or sterling gray. She still looked gorgeous, despite whatever color she wore that day, and I always made sure to tell her. Her smile was always worth it. Caddy refused to change her contacts or even take them out when I was in the room with her. I didn't really see what the big deal was, considering I was an avid contact wearer myself, and was no stranger to people sticking their fingers in their eyes to take them out. Regardless, I still left the room whenever she changed her contacts or took them out before bed. As I said, it wasn't a big deal to me, but Caddy told me that she felt uncomfortable when people watched her fiddle with her contacts. Something about always dropping them or whatever when someone was looking, whatever that meant. It wasn't until the start of my senior year that I had seen Caddy take her contacts out. We were still living in my apartment and our relationship was as good as the day we met. I was actually browsing for engagement rings on my lunch breaks at work. The little boy fantasy of marrying a gorgeous woman unfolding in my brain. I couldn't help it though. I loved Caddy and I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. It helped that I knew she wouldn't say no. It had been a Thursday night and I had gotten home from work. We'd had dinner together and watched some stupid movie on the TV, more enthralled with each other than the 3-star blockbuster they were showing. I had just gotten out of the shower and was making my way to our bedroom. The door was ajar and I saw Caddy on her side of the bed, opening up her contact case. I leaned against the doorframe, hidden from Caddy, and couldn't help but smile to myself. There sat my gorgeously weird girlfriend, who I've never seen naked and who I've seen cry tears and snot before more times I could count, who was still too nervous to let me see her switch her contacts. I noticed her contact case was a lot bigger than any of the ones I'd ever used myself, but shrugged it off. Whatever. Contact cases were always different wherever you got them from. I stood and watched as Caddy raised her hand to her left eye, presumably to pinch the contact and take it out. I felt the breath leave my lungs as I watched her pluck her entire left eye out of her head. She was completely still as she did so, humming to herself as she used her other hand to screw open the other side of her large contact case and drop the eye she was holding into it. With her right eye still intact, she reached around behind her and pulled out another contact case. I realized these were the eyes she was going to put on instead. I watched her complete this process with ease, switching out her eyes and cleaning up any mess she left behind. She neatly put both contact cases in her bedside drawer and shut it. She blinked slowly a few times like she was letting her new eyes adjust to her skull. I felt bile rising in my throat. I'm not sure how long I stood there, motionless. My eyes had glazed over at one point, and I was so sure that I couldn't have seen what I thought I had. There's no way that my girlfriend of 2 years, the woman that I was planning to ask to marry me, had just plucked out both her eyes and put in a new set. When I felt like I could feel my feet again, I walked into our bedroom and sat down on my side of the bed, still wrapped in a towel from my shower. Caddy was sitting up in bed underneath the covers, reading a book. She smiled at me when I laid down next to her, raising her hand and stroking my hair a little. She asked me if I was ready for bed, and I nodded. We turned the lights off, and before rolling off to our respected sides, she kissed me. She pulled away and looked at me with someone else's green eyes. The rest of that night went by in a flash. I didn't even bother sleeping. I waited until Caddy was fast asleep and snoring softly before I quietly crept around to her side of the bed. I opened her bedside drawer and peeked in. There were dozens of those contact cases scattered next to empty wrappers and water bottles. If this were any other kind of situation, I would have made fun of her of how much of a slob she was. I grabbed a handful of cases and crept to the bathroom. I locked the door behind me and sat on the closed toilet seat. I didn't know how badly my hands were shaking until I brought one of the cases closer to my face. I unscrewed the cap. An eyeball looked back at me. It was bobbling in some kind of clear liquid solution that stank of chemicals. I wondered briefly, what kind of chemical was necessary to keep eyes fresh? Keep them on ice. I left that night. I put Caddy's cases back and packed a bag. Clothes, chargers, my wallet, even my passport. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew I couldn't come back there. I didn't want to. I dropped out of the University of Oklahoma the next day. I remembered getting in my car and just driving. My phone rang a dozen times, presumably Caddy freaking out and wanting to ask me where I was. I never picked up. That was 10 years ago. I returned back to college when I was 28, settling in a small town in Kansas called Lebanon. I've never gotten married. I still have nightmares of what I found in Caddy's drawer. Nightmares of her finding me and coming from my eyes. She always told me they were such a pretty color. I was absolutely strapped for cash. I mean, what more can I say? I had just gotten kicked out of my mother's house. Granted, I was 25 with no job. I was desperate for cash. I didn't want to be that guy working minimum wage jobs for the rest of his life. I didn't want to make enough to barely support myself. What was I to do? In hindsight, I probably should have just started there and worked my way up. Like, you know, a normal fucking person. Well, I decided I'd do some freelancing. It paid pretty good and I could pick my own jobs. I felt pretty confident that I could make enough to start getting an actual education other than a high school diploma. What better place to look than on Craigslist? Right? No. Wrong. I did it anyways though. One night while scrolling through the job section of Craigslist, I stumbled upon an ad for help tending a farm. It provided living quarters, free meals, and the best part, money. The ad was written by a man who said he had inherited a farm, but he was getting too old to tend the animals and crops as efficiently as he once used to. The pay was extremely good, and I had a place to stay basically rent-free. After about 2 hours of deliberation, I decided to go ahead and send him an email. I explained I only needed this temporarily, as I was saving money for school. I told him I could be a reliable worker, but only for 6 months. I didn't really expect an answer back, as he probably wanted something longer or more permanent. It only took about 15 minutes before I received a response. I sent the email at 2 a.m. I admit, I was a little off-put by the speedy reply, especially since it was the middle of the night. I figured he'd be sleeping. Anyways, the email he sent was pretty short and to the point. He explained any help was good enough, and said he'd be ready for my arrival the following day. He left the address and his phone number. The next morning, I packed everything I wanted to take, told my mother I was leaving for her job and I'd stay in contact, and headed out to the farm. When I arrived, he was nothing like I had imagined. He was tall and fairly overweight. He had a beard that wasn't quite full, but still enough to be called a beard, I guess. His eyes were dark, really dark. I could barely make out his pupils. Upon approaching him with my bags, He reached out to me. I dropped my bags and shook his hand. It felt forced. It wasn't a very friendly handshake. It was firm, almost gripping. He let go, and I felt my arm fall to my side. He asked me to hurry in, so I did. He quickly showed me to my room and asked if I could start right away. Flustered, I dropped my belongings in my room and threw my phone and keys on the bed. I quickly changed my pants into jeans and put on some old shoes. I walked out to the main hall. He stood there, almost mannequin-like. When we locked eyes, he started telling me my tasks. I was to tend the field 3 times a day. He said he had plowed over the land to start anew. He was planting corn, and a lot of it. He claimed he was going to sell and distribute the corn to local grocery stores. I asked about the animals, and he said there were none. Before I could ask any further, he cut me off and threw me a shovel. He asked me to fill in holes throughout the farm before he could till the land. I took the shovel and hurried out the door. Staring at him was uncomfortable. I was tired. I had barely slept the night before. Hell, I had sent the email the night before. This all felt like a whirlwind, but all I thought about was the money. I knew in my gut this wasn't right, but I really needed this. The farm was huge. At the end of the field, you couldn't even see the house anymore. I know because I had to walk through the whole way to fill in holes. Holes I never found, by the way, until the edge of the farm. It was surrounded in thick forest. I knew it was a rural area, but I didn't really realize the farm was basically a one-way in, one-way out kind of deal. The forest was dense, really dense. You'd get lost in a matter of seconds if you weren't paying attention. When I reached the very end of the farm, I noticed only one hole, and about 14 other already filled in holes. Why would he send me out here, over a mile away, to fill in one hole? I felt uneasy about the whole thing. As I started to fill in the hole, which is about 10 feet deep, I couldn't stop glancing over at the already filled disturbed ground. After I filled in about 2 feet worth of dirt, my curiosity got the best of me. I decided to dig into one of the already filled holes. These were not small holes. They were wide and about 12 feet in length. They were big enough to fit a deceased cow. Hell, maybe even 2. I had already figured that's what the case was, considering there weren't any animals. I'm glad I went with my gut. It didn't take much digging to reach the first, weird object. It was a wallet. I picked it up and opened it, but it was completely empty. I tossed it to the side and kept digging. That's when I saw a hint of red fabric. I couldn't tell right away what it was. It could have been an animal wrapped in a blanket. It's safe to say I was heading into denial. It was only about 4 feet down when I discovered the body. Her body was in bad shape, but she wasn't decomposing. All of the trauma she went through was clear on her skin. I knelt down and felt her body. She was cold. I sat there for a couple minutes, just staring at her. Once I realized that her death had to be within the last 48 hours, I ran to the nearest tree and vomited. I didn't even bother filling in the hole I was supposed to, but I reburied the girl. Her body didn't deserve to be exposed like that. I threw the wallet into an entrance of the woods near the graves. I figured the police would find it, even if he were to try to hide the bodies better. After that, I ran. I felt like an Olympic athlete. It was starting to get dark, and I had to make it back before then, or I'd be wandering around this field for hours. The last thing I wanted was to be hunted down like an animal in pitch black. I knew that's what he was going to do. He knew filling the holes would have taken until dark. Once I reached the house, I finally stopped to catch my breath. I knew I had to remain composed, or he would know. I regulated my breath and walked in. He was sitting at the dining table to the left of the house. I couldn't tell what he was doing, but once he heard me open the front door, his head swung around so fast I thought he'd snap his neck. He looked at me like a deer in the headlights. It was obvious he hadn't expected me back so soon. "You're done?" I could tell he was trying everything in his power to remain calm. "I got sick. I had to come back. I'll go back out and finish it. I have to use the bathroom." I tried to sound as nonchalant as I could, but I knew he could tell I was lying. After looking at me up and down, he said, "Okay then, get back to it. I want it done by tonight." I shook my head and hurried to my room. I took the clothes I had taken off when I arrived and shoved them into my suitcase. I was so happy I had it unpacked. I grabbed my phone, but my keys were gone. Frantic, I started looking for them as quietly as possible. He took them. I knew it. My original plan was run in, grab my things, and book it the hell out of there, which is pretty hard to do with no keys. I sat on the bed for a moment. My phone had no signal, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I started going through my pictures. If I was going to die, I wanted to see my friends and family one more time. Even if it was just over a phone screen, it felt like enough. That's when I stumbled upon my 23rd birthday party, when my mother had gifted me my car as a present. I stood proudly by my car, with a set of keys in each hand. I had 2 sets of keys. I don't know why it didn't dawn on me earlier. I never used them, but I always carried them in case I locked myself out of my car. I unzipped my suitcase and pulled everything out of it. At the very bottom was my second set of keys. They must have been the first thing I threw in while packing. It was a mindless habit at that point, and in that moment, I couldn't have been more proud of myself. I decided to say screw the clothes and grabbed my phone and the keys. I peeked out of the bedroom and walked to the bathroom. It wasn't hard to act ill because I was already nauseated from sheer terror and anxiety. I tried to make over-exaggerated gagging sounds, but I eventually threw up. It wasn't my intention, but it made it more realistic. I rinsed out my mouth and stuck my phone and keys into the side of my pants. I made sure they weren't obvious and headed back out the main area. Still sitting at the dining table, I told him I was ready to finish the work. He nodded, and I walked out. I started walking toward the farm again, because when I looked behind me, he was watching me through the window. I walked slow, and once he wasn't watching me anymore, I fled to my car. He heard my frantic running and bolted outside. By then, I was already in my car and pulling out. He started to sprint full speed at my car, and I floored it. I heard 2 gunshots ring out, and I felt a slight impact as one of the bullets shot through the passenger seat. I sped until I felt safe. It had taken me 4 hours to get there, and about 2 to get home. I immediately went to my mother's and told her everything. Turns out, There were 52 bodies discovered on the farmland when I reported what had happened to the authorities. They conducted a thorough search of the whole farm. Many missing persons cases that went cold throughout the years were coming to light. The only thing they didn't find was him. I look every few months to see if they finally have a lead, but they never do. The name he had given me was fake, and the phone number was that of a burner phone. I didn't have any pictures of him. I described him to a sketch artist, although I saw online that there's a farm on the west coast. Pays well, living expenses taken care of, and free meals. It's run by an old man who says the work is just too much to handle by himself. It seems too good to be true. The similarities are eerie. I know you might need the money, but I wouldn't go if I were you. My son, Thomas, never had a shortage of friends. Always the class clown. Always the likable, relatable, funny goof that he was. He passed away 2 months ago. He jumped off an overpass and landed on his neck. He was 17, and I'm writing this for him because he wanted me to. I know a lot of you know about the internet and the dark web and all of that. The thing is, I didn't. And maybe if I had, my son would still be alive. Please, stay off the dark web. The game is called Veritatem Decare, and I'm an American English speaker, but I believe it means something along the lines of tell the truth in Latin. I only began to notice things after his last few months. Troubles at school, which he never had. He sat behind a girl in class and cut a chunk of hair off her head. He was suspended. I would look through the history of his computer to find violent videos, people being murdered and sodomized. Video after video, white powder substance all over his room, salt lining his windows. We took him to the dentist because of an infection on the side of his mouth. The dentist examined him and pulled me aside to let me know my son had pulled out and crushed 3 teeth in his mouth himself. The last straw was when I caught him in the bathroom about 2 months before he died. He was carving some sort of symbol into his arm on a live stream. I figured his odd behavior must be a cry for help, thinking maybe he was depressed or suicidal. He was hospitalized for a week and then released. 2 weeks later, my son died. A month before my son died, every person in my family received an email. Each one read, "Ask Thomas about the little girl who died down the street. Ask him what he knows. Make him tell the truth." The email came from an anonymous sender, and when confronted with it, Thomas began to get nervous and visibly sick. Who sent it to Thomas? I want to know. If this is some sick prank to scare your little sister, it's not funny. I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. The email pulled up on the laptop in front of my son. He kept his head low, avoiding eye contact with me, staring at his fingers in his lap. "I don't know what it is, Mom. Probably some spam email or something," he muttered, almost looking up at me, but quickly averting his gaze. "A spam email that happens to have your name in it and information on the crime committed down the street a few weeks ago? I don't think so." I glanced at the screen for a moment. "So, do you know something you're not telling your father and I about this?" I said, looking back at him again. "No." Tears welled up in his eyes as he stared at his computer screen. "I don't know anything." What is going on with you, Thomas? This is so unlike you. Please, if you're not okay, please just tell us. We want to help you. We want our Tom back." I put my hand on his, but he pulled it away quickly and wiped his eyes quicker. "I don't know anything, Mom. I already told you. I'm fine." He got up abruptly and started towards the doorway. Now I could feel the tears begin to form in my eyes as I saw him walk away. My son was almost unrecognizable. He was skin and bones, purple bags under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes hung and bagged on him as I saw him walk to the door. "I love you," I squeaked out. He stopped for a moment and looked back at me, and I swear to God, I never seen more pain in someone's eyes than I saw in his in that moment. He let a tear fall as he turned away again, his back to me now. "I love you, Mama," he croaked out before exiting the room quickly. He began to look worse as time went on. Thin, frail, tired, fatigued. My husband and I found therapists, took him to doctors, pulled him out of school, and did everything we thought was right leading up to my son's suicide. About a week after his death, I felt like half of me was missing. I couldn't move or talk or get out of bed, and I didn't. All I could do was think about Thomas, and the guilt ate me alive. I knew my email had to be overflowing with emails from clients at work, and I knew I had to get back to work soon. For me, for my husband, for my daughter. 2 weeks later, I finally checked in. At the very top of my inbox was an email with an anonymous sender and no subject. I began to tear up, wishing whoever it was would just leave me alone and let me grieve. But curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. I wish I hadn't. The email was nothing but 9 black words that read, "He did it, and the game is not over." "So, you're saying she's barren?" My mother was crying. The doctor winces. "That's not the first word I would use. But she is infertile. Yes." She turns to me. "I'm sorry, Lorelei, but this early menopause is irreversible. You're not going to be able to have biological children when you're older." My mother lets out another sob and clasps her hands over her mouth. She is shaking. I turn to her and hesitantly place a gentle hand onto her back, rubbing smooth circles onto her shoulder blade with my thumb. "It's going to be okay," I soothe. "It's not the end of the world." She was making this a really big fucking deal. "Yeah, it's not great, but come on. I'm 17 and not really too worried about my status as a child bearer when I'm older. And hey, not getting a period for the rest of my life sounds like a pretty sweet deal." So there were no tears from my eyes when I heard the news. But Mom is wailing like I'd just been diagnosed with a brain tumor. I make eye contact with the doctor and give a half-hearted shrug. She looks away. The only sound in the examination room is the cry of my mother. A few days later, and she's still not out of her funk. The door to her bedroom is shut and locked, and despite my persistent knocking, she refuses to answer. Her endless cries wafting through the wood and reverberating through the rest of the house. I pour some boxed pasta into the pot and wince as the water splashed over, the stove hissing in protest. Sadie, my younger sister of 4 years, watches from the kitchen table. "I'm sick of pasta," she snorts. I roll my eyes. "You don't like it? Cook for yourself." Ever since the news, Mom hasn't done anything. Eating, showering, talking. It's so unlike her. She's always been the most resilient woman I've ever known. A super mom, taking on the role of both mother and father for Sadie and I after our dad passed away. A pang of guilt settles in my chest as a noticeably loud sob bounces through the kitchen. Sadie groans, "All this over your broken uterus." I bark out a laugh. Yeah, I guess she's pissed I can't be an incubator for her grandchildren. Over our buttered pasta, we listen as Mom's sighs settle down and finally subside, which we assume means she fell into a lightless sleep. That's been her routine the past 3 days. Cry, sleep, cry some more. I interrupted the silence. "You done your homework yet?" Sadie rolls her eyes. "Yes, Mom. Just looking out for you. You don't want to be a family disappointment too." Her eyes softened at that. "You're not a disappointment, Lori. It's not your..." She is interrupted by a knock at the door. We are interrupted again by an even more surprising sound. Our mother's bed creaking as she bounds out of bed, through her door, into the foyer, throwing open the front door with a flourish. I gaze from the kitchen. A man I had never seen before stands in the doorway, balding and gray, a satchel on his hip and round glasses on his face. "Nathan," she says, relief evident in her voice. "Please, come in." Nathan enters the house, and they both enter the kitchen where Sadie and I were finishing up our pasta. My mother looks awful. Heavy bags under her eyes, hair frazzled and thinning, eyes red and bloodshot, still leaking with tears. But she musters a smile, for the first time in what seems like ages. "Lori, Sadie, meet Nathan, a friend of mine." Hi," I respond, and Sadie follows suit. "Would you like some pasta?" Nathan chuckled humorously. "No thank you, dear." His voice immediately puts me on edge. "It's nice to meet you too. Your mother has told me wonderful things." Sadie was never one for subtleties. "Mom," she says, "who is this? And why is he here?" Nathan laughs and my mom blushes. "Be polite, girls. Nathan is here to help us. We're going to head to my office. All of us." I cocked my head, confused. We had never been allowed in Mom's office, ever. Strictly off limits, always locked. I was told it was because there were important legal documents that she didn't want her hands on. Mom was a lawyer. "Your office?" I repeat, hesitantly. I glance at Sadie. Blatant confusion is written on her face as well. "Yes," my mother responds, now impatient. "Come on, now. We don't have time to waste." The four of us trek up the stairs to the second floor and head for the door. Mom disappears for a moment and returns with a key, rusted and silver. She shoves the key in the lock and turns, opening the door with a solid creak. "What the fuck?" Sadie whispers, and I don't even hear my mother reprimand her over the buzzing in my head. I've never seen anything like this. The walls are stained with chrism messages, which I pray are in paint rather than blood. He is coming. At dawn, he will rise. Death to the non-believers. She who bears the sun will be blessed. Wooden totems litter the floor, pulled together with broken bones and filthy string. The skeleton of what looks to be a sheep slumps in the corner, like a toddler in timeout. A pentagram beats down from the ceiling like a sun. My mom sighs. Girls, you were meant to find this out later, but mitigating circumstances have arisen. Her eyes survey the room, filled with pride, as she straightens her posture and finally glances at my sister and I. Our family is special, howbeit unlucky. We have been blessed with the blood of Lucifer in every cell of our bodies, down a long lineage, and have lived to serve him as his children, and as such, we owe him the gift only we as women can give. His vassal to earth, his child. Sorry? What? I stutter, eyes fixed on the sheep carcass. He needs a son. The death of your father was punishment for bearing 2 daughters. I fear his next punishment may be worse. She glances at me, tears filling her eyes once more. Lorelei, we were so close, until you were barren. Her gaze shifts to the pentagon on the ceiling once more. Perhaps this is a test of my loyalty. Sadie and I make eye contact and turn towards the door, and Nathan moves to block it, his frame taking up the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. I fear there is no time to waste. My mother continues. Who knows what the next few years will bring, which is why I brought Nathan, to give Sadie a child before all hope is lost. What? Sadie shrieks, and I feel my jaw drop. You're fucking insane, I scream. You're fucking crazy. This fucking creep is not going to touch my sister. Adrenaline rushed through my veins. I turn to where Nathan stands, hands reaching for his zipper as my mother approaches Sadie. No fucking way, I scream. The next moments seem like a blur. Sadie begins to sob as my mother braces her hands on her shoulders. Nathan's fly goes down as he fumbles with the zipper, and my foot and Doc Martens collide straight with his groin as hard as I could, eliciting a groan as he crumples to the floor. Pervert, I scream. As he withers, my eyes move to the floor for something, anything. Spying a large bone on the ground, what looks like a femur, I lug it into my arms, struggling against its weight. I whip back around at my mother, who is attempting to restrain a screaming Sadie, before I swing the bone around my head and smash it against her skull. She falls as well, and I waste no time grabbing Sadie's hand and rushing out the door. As we race down the stairs, my mother's staggered voice follows us. You won't get away, you fucking whores. We are all over the world, and we will serve our father. Sadie is sobbing as I throw open the front door and we run into the night. Destination nowhere. I have no idea where to go from here, and I swear, I feel something watching us. I think we are momentarily screwed. Do you have any advice? Yesterday was a regular day for me. especially since I had an Amazon package on its way. As a shopaholic, there was always a part of my brain waiting for a package to arrive at my door. Unfortunately for that part of my brain, it'll have to let go after what the delivery driver did. I heard a knock at my door while I was busy doing my home workout routine. Push-ups, squats, planks, and tricep dips. I interrupted my second round to check the door to see if it was my package. Looking through the peephole, I saw the delivery driver standing over my package, glancing at the paint on my house to appear nonchalant. A pad was in his hand, and I realized I needed a sign for the package. I opened the door with a polite smile and greeting. He had already extended the pad toward me with a polite grin of his own. A robotic "sign please" came from his mouth. He was lean but strong looking, and must have been, judging by the fact he got this package to my door. As I took the pad, I became aware of how heavily I was breathing from my workout. I signed my name and gave him back his pad. As I bent down to lift the package, he asked me if he could help. I politely declined and said I had it. "But sir, this package is 80 pounds. Are you sure you've got it?" "Yes, thank you. I was just working out actually, so this was perfect timing." "I can see that." I had the package in my arms and walked backward into my house, cognizant of the fact that the delivery driver was still standing there. Weren't they supposed to be in a hurry? Whatever. Must be his first day. At that moment, I was more concerned about the package I was carrying and not dropping it. As I placed the box on the floor inside my doorway, he asked me a question. "I'm sorry to ask, but I simply must put it out there. Do you want to die?" I straightened up, turning my head to make eye contact with him. His courteous smile turned to that of a child asking a Hispanic person if they spoke Spanish. Head tilted downward, biting his lip. "Excuse me?" I replied. "Do you, wanna die?" I had no response for him. I closed the door in his face, peeking through the peephole. I saw him casually place his pad on the ground next to himself on my porch. He took off his hat and lanyard, placing them on the ground upon his pad almost reverently. I turned the deadbolt lock. As he heard the click, his head pitched up almost like a dog. He shrugged to himself and mumbled something to himself. I couldn't hear it, but as he turned back towards the door, I could begin to hear what he was saying. "Wanna make it hard, don't they?" He adjusted his stance, raised his foot, and I flinched as he kicked the door. His kick vibrated through the door, and I felt as if I just received a sneak preview of what was to come. Before I could move, he kicked the door again. Some people fight in these situations, and others flight, but my body decided to freeze. My legs were made of lead as I slowly shuffled away from the door. Each kick made my heart drop, and suddenly my package was the least of my concerns. The final blow was delivered to my door, and the wood of the door frame splintered toward me as the door slammed against the wall beside me. The driver came through with the broken door, losing his balance and falling at my feet on his stomach. He looked up at me, my face probably horrified. I still couldn't move. He chuckled to himself and looked at me as he said, "Well, that was easier than I thought it would be." Suddenly, my body decided it would be a good idea to run. I turned tail and bolted for my back door. He yelled after me, but I was not listening. My only thoughts were, get outside, don't look back, like the output of a broken record. Fumbling with the lock on the back door, his pounding footsteps shook the walls as he began to pursue me. Give me something I can work with, he yelled, almost in a demanding tone. I finally pulled the door open, still refusing to watch him tear through my living room. Throwing myself outside, I made a series of automatic split-second decisions. I pulled the door closed behind me. Deciding to let him have it, I pushed against the door and whacked him square in the forehead. I heard him cry out, but didn't wait around to see what was next. I turned toward my yard, spotting a standing shovel in the grass. Making my way toward it, my mind ran simulated fights within my head. Ones where I beat him to a pulp with the shovel. Others where he reached me before I even got to it. Don't look back. Get the shovel. Pulling the shovel free from the ground, I spun on my heel and turned toward my back door, seeing that the driver was just coming through it. We had a distance of about 15 meters between us, and he smiled when he saw the shovel. He walked toward me, almost meandering as he spoke. A shovel? Man, come on. You were just working out. He was animated when he spoke, gesticulating toward me in the sky as if he was annoyed. Stay back, I yelled at him, fake lunging toward him with my shovel. He stopped and flinched, but resumed his journey toward me. You got me there, he said, chuckling to himself. I began backpedaling. I'm warning you. No, you're not, he replied. He moved toward me at the same speed I was walking backward. If you were warning me, you would have held your ground. You don't even know how to use that thing, do you? He was right, so I stopped in my tracks, narrowing my gaze. Fear turned to a defense primal rage. I didn't want to hurt him with the shovel to protect myself anymore. I wanted to hurt him with the shovel for the hell of it. He raised his eyebrows at me. Perhaps I should stop giving you ideas. His stride sent my heart into my throat, but I was ready for him. You should shut your mouth before I rip it off. I bellowed with all my might. A sound more ferocious had never come out of me before. Show me, he challenged, and began to sprint toward me. Rage and fear battled within me, and I stabbed with the shovel. Truth be told, I don't remember much of this part. The next thing I remember, I had swung the shovel from the side and he actually caught the spade in his left hand and lunged in with his right to grab the handle. Yanking hard, he removed the shovel from my grasp and fear overpowered the will to fight. I turned and ran toward the fence. You have nowhere to go, he yelled after me, casting the shovel aside. I had almost reached a wooden fence and stopped. Don't look back, my mind told me, but I disobeyed this time. Looking behind myself, I saw blood dripping from his left hand. His stride was no longer relaxed, but a determined speed walk. His smile was no longer there. Turning toward the fence, my only choice was to hop in. Grabbing onto the top, I tried pulling myself up, but to no avail. My arms were too tired, and fear screamed at me to stop and try running a different direction. Glancing back one more time, he was upon me, He punched my side so hard it knocked me to the ground on my back, and the wind was knocked out of me. This part is again extremely blurry. I'm not sure if I was screaming, but I was definitely flailing. He jumped on top of me, grabbing my wild arm, controlling it with a terrifying strength. He pulled it upward and sunk his teeth into my forearm. I tried to hit him in the face, but his left elbow nailed my wrist and sent the arm away. With one hand, he held my arm still, while the other punched me in the face and protected his own effortlessly. The pain in my arm turned to a miniature inferno, scorched by the sensation of fresh air beneath my skin. I remember an image of him with my flesh in his mouth, torn from my arm itself. It was the last view I had of him still alive, before his hand caught me underneath my chin and forced my head into the ground, exposing my neck. He was impossibly strong. The blazing pain appeared on my chest, and I felt his teeth sink in and pull more flesh from my body. His right hand was digging its fingers into the open wound on my arm, and I went mad with pain. A deafening pop changed the situation immediately, and I was able to fight back. I got out from underneath his limp body and ran straight toward the house. Don't look back, my mind commanded. I listened this time. I called the police, and it turned out my neighbor had shot the guy from the other side of the fence. He could hear me screaming at someone while relaxing in his backyard. Luckily, his body was more fit than mine, and he was able to hop over the fence, putting another bullet in the driver's head from behind with his hunting rifle. I recognized him and let him into my house, and he performed first aid on my wounds. I don't recognize the driver. Police told me his name, life story, and then some. I didn't recognize any of it. Why exactly he attacked me is a mystery to everybody, including the police. There were no records of violence. At least, that's what they told me. And he was, by all accounts, a good kid. He was only 22. A few skin grafts later, I'm back home with a Glock pistol, lent to me by my awesome backyard neighbor, and some serious issues I'll need to discuss with my therapist. I really hope brick and mortar stores don't get phased out in my lifetime. Mom? Eric, no. You're 13. But Mom, he helps me sleep. Son, you're a teenager now. You don't need Mr. Ruffles to sleep anymore. It's the same old conversation again. Eric is sitting on the stairs in his pajamas, giving me the pout and the misty eyes as mean old Mom tries to steal his beloved teddy bear from him. I've had this chat with him for the last 3 years, but this time legitimately felt like he had outgrown his stuffed bear. Mr. Ruffles needed the break too. His soft white fur had grown matted and stiff from years of being buried into my son's loving arms. One of his beady black eyes is loose, dangling by a few small threads like a hypnotist watch. The poor bear is almost hard to look at. Eric doesn't care, of course. He's been bedtime buddies with Mr. Ruffles for 10 years now. Why should the stake be snapped now? He stomped his foot against the wooden chair. Come on, Mom, it's my birthday. Can't I sleep with him tonight? The bear, who had been sitting on his lap, jolted from the sudden leg movement. I sighed. You said that last year, sweetheart. But it's true. Eric propped the bear into an embrace, hugging up against him while enhancing his pout. "Just one more night, please?" "Eric." I kept my voice steady, holding out my hand. "I know it's hard to let go, and I'm not trying to be mean, but you're too old for your stuffed animal." Doing my best to try and be the good cop, I gave him a sympathetic smile. "Don't you think Mr. Ruffles could use a vacation?" He shook his head. 13 years old, and he's acting the exact same as a kindergartner. "I love him," he whined. Once again, I sighed. It's been a long, exhausting day. I didn't have the energy to continue to put up with Eric's childish problems. "Alright," I conceded. "One more night, but after this, he's going to Goodwill." His smile is bittersweet. He hugged Mr. Ruffles even tighter, nodding as he scampered up the stairs. I waited for the bedroom door to close before returning to the kitchen, ready to deal with all the dishes smothered with frosting and ice cream residue. The knock at the door woke me up. Groggily, I reached out and plucked my phone up from the nightstand. 2:20 in the morning was the last possible time I wanted to wake up like this. I let out a sleepy moan and rolled onto my side, tucking my phone into my pocket and hoping that my problem would disappear. It didn't. Another series of knocks followed. "Eric," I muttered, just loud enough for him to hear on the other side. "Go away. Mom needs to go to work." The doorknob creaked, much to my dismay. I heard the hinges squeak as the bedroom door gave way to a thin column of golden light from the corridor. Unfortunately, it lined up almost directly with my eyes. Shielding my eyes from the unwelcome beam of light, I slowly sat up in bed. "Eric, let me sleep," I repeated, this time more forcefully. I took a look over at the doorway. I can't see Eric's silhouette in the light, even though the door is halfway open. "Eric?" I called out. "Sweetheart?" A faint sound could be heard on the other end of the door, like a pillow falling off the couch. I sat up a bit straighter, now somewhat concerned. "Eric?" The door creaked open further. I glanced down at the floor, noticing an upright shadow was standing in the doorway. A teddy bear-shaped shadow. I squinted, trying to validate if what I was seeing was even real. "Mr. Ruffles," I whispered. Being tired was one thing, but seeing my son's stuffed animal open my door was a different beast. The bear remained motionless. It was somehow standing on its cotton-stuffed legs despite having no physical means to do so. I looked out into the corridor to try and see if Eric was pulling some sort of prank on me. "Sweetheart, if this is a joke, it's not funny," I called out. I received no response. Mr. Ruffles was still and silent, waiting in my doorway like a fuzzy little statue. I rubbed at my eyes before slowly climbing out of bed and making my way towards him. "What on earth?" I muttered, crouching down to get a look at the toy. Slowly, I reached down to pick him up. In one swift motion, he reacted. Mr. Ruffles sprang to life. Taking advantage of my outreached hand, he jumped. Yes, jumped up and clung onto my fingers with his stubby paws. He scaled further up my arm like a lizard, climbing up my forearm into my shoulder with startling speed. I yelped, rapidly shaking my arm in an attempt to fling him off. Mr. Ruffles held tight, wrapping his soft yet somehow rigid limbs around my shoulder. "Eric!" I shouted, racing out into my corridor. "Eric! My voice was cut off as something was stuffed into my mouth. My eyes darted to my left side. Mr. Ruffles was sitting on my shoulder like a parrot of some sort, his right paw jammed beneath my teeth. I let out a muffled shout before biting down with as much force as I could muster. Mr. Ruffles had absolutely no reaction, hardly even budging at the force of my teeth. In a panic, I started shaking my head back and forth, up and down, trying to shake the stuffed bear around like a dog playing with a chew toy. He flew off my shoulder, dangling around limply in my jaws from his trapped paw. Noticing his vulnerability, I spat him out onto the ground. He flew a couple of feet towards the living room before he plodded onto the floor in a ragdoll position, slowly gathering himself back onto his feet. I took advantage of the momentary incapacitation to bolt up the stairs, my feet scaling 2 at a time. "Eric!" I screamed. "Eric, wake up!" I turned the corner and nearly ran into my son's bedroom door, my shaky hands gripping the doorknob as I tried to open it. It was completely rigged. In the background, I could hear what sounded like a series of beanbags being lobbed onto each ascending stair. I pounded against the door, desperately trying to get Eric to hear me. "Eric! Eric! Eric!" I chanted at the top of my lungs. Your bear is..." My face hit the door as something slammed into my back. Cotton paws and legs wriggled and writhed as they tried to find footing on the back of my shirt. I screamed once more, stumbling backwards as Mr. Ruffles climbed up onto the back of my neck. "Eric!" I shouted once more. My hair was being tugged viciously by the bear, pulling me backwards a step or two away from the bedroom door. Suddenly, I could no longer see. My eyes were being smothered by a pair of soft, cuddly teddy bear appendages. The grip his legs had around my neck began to tighten. I stumbled around in my blind frenzy, trying to slam the back of my head into any wall I could find. The bear held tight with impossible resilience. My teeth gritted as I reached up, seizing Mr. Ruffles by his little ears in an attempt to wrestle him off of me. But the damn bear wouldn't budge. My fingers dug deep into his fur. I screamed in rage, tugging and tugging at his head to try and dislodge him. His legs tightened even further around my neck, starting to close my windpipe. "You little piece of..." I groaned, furiously slamming my back into a wall. My hands redirected to his paws, trying to remove them from over my eyes. It took a great amount of strength, but I managed to pry his nubby substitute of a blindfold off of me. When I had his paws in mine, I crouched down and flung my arms forward. The fuzzy chokehold around my neck came loose within an instant. I glanced up just in time to witness Mr. Ruffles sailing through the air, flying over the balcony and down the hallway below, where he hit the floor with an unceremonious thud. I reacted without wasting a moment, bolting into the upstairs bathroom and slamming the door shut before locking it with lightning speed. The adrenaline was starting to wear off. I took a shaky seat on the toilet, trying to steady my breathing. My trembling fingers tweezed my phone out of the pocket of my pajama pants. I glanced down at the phone screen's notifications. 2 voicemails from Eric at 11:23 p.m. and 2:16 a.m. With a quivering fingertip, I opened up the first missed message. "Hey, Mom." My son's pre-recorded voice whispered through the speaker. I know it's a bit late, and you're probably asleep, but I think you're right. I'm not gonna like it, but I think tonight I'm gonna try to sleep without Mr. Ruffles. He's gonna spend the night in the closet with all the other toys. He'll miss me like I'll miss him, but he'll have plenty of friends. We'll see how it goes in the morning, I guess. Good night. Love you." The second one went a lot less well. "Mom, I'm outside. I jumped out my window. There was banging coming from my closet." The volume of his voice was raising and falling rapidly, and he was breathing heavily. I don't know what happened. I'm scared. I'm going to the neighbor's house. Call the police." There was a sharp, loud knock on the bathroom door. I screamed and nearly tossed my phone into the air. Mr. Ruffles had recovered from his little tumble. My fingers flew across the number pad, dialing 911. I kept my eyes on the door as it continued to be pounded upon, my foot tapping rapidly, tears starting to well up in the corner of my eyes. Finally, an operator picked up. 911, what's your emergency? The voice blared. There's a threat in my house. I blurted out. There's a serious threat. Alright, ma'am, what's your name? The banging increased in volume. I tried my best to remain calm. Vera Butler. I have a son named Eric, age 13. That's our family. I see. Miss Butler, what kind of threat are you seeking to Another bang, this one louder than the others. I let out a startled yell. The operator seemed to have picked up on that one. Ma'am, are you in danger? They asked, noticeable concern in their tone. Yes, I shouted. I'm held up in my upstairs bathroom, praying my door doesn't get busted down. Alright, Miss Butler, we'll send out an emergency dispatch as soon as possible. Can we get an address? 1457 Harrison Street. A particular abrupt pound from the door sent the remainder of my answer trembling in my throat. I choked a bit before resuming. Harrison Street. Right away, ma'am. Stay safe. The call hung up abruptly, leaving me feeling vulnerable as ever in the bathroom. My eyes remained glued to the door, watching it bulge ever so slightly out with each pound at roughly 11 inches high. Soon? They'll have to get here soon. I need to see my son again. He needs to know I'm safe. I refuse to be killed by a teddy bear. I'm sure most of you would have heard that old myth that if you swallow a watermelon seed, it'll begin to grow inside of your stomach. Well, that's what I thought it was anyways. An old myth. That was until a week ago when I swallowed one of the small black seeds that live inside of watermelons. It all began when I cut myself a hefty slice of watermelon and dug in. The sweet juice hit my tongue as I bit down on the soft fruit. I went in for another bite, and as I did, I heard a loud crunch, and felt something crunch beneath my teeth. I knew straight away that it was one of those pesky seeds that often get in the way of enjoying the delicious fruit. Oh well. I swallowed my mouth full, seed and all, and continued to eat. It didn't take too long to devour the large slice that I had cut for myself, and as far as I was aware, I hadn't eaten any more of the seeds. But then I soon discovered just how wrong I was. I remember that night having a fairly vivid dream that I got into a fight which ended with me taking a few punches in the stomach. I remember the pain and nausea that I felt inside of the dream, and I thought that the pain wouldn't be there when I woke up. The first thing that I realized was that the pain still persisted in my stomach, and not only did it just persist, but it was also worse than it seemed in the dream. I remember waking up and feeling the intense pain that spread across my entire abdomen. I felt it deep inside of my stomach, through my chest, and down both of my sides. It was a dull ache that would occasionally send a rush of stabbing pain that started near my ribcage and would travel down to near my pelvis. I tried to sit up in my bed, but failed. I had almost sat upright when I felt another wave of stabbing pain, which made me fall backwards into the bed once more. Once the shooting pain had passed, I managed to roll over onto my side, and I managed to drag my body over to the side of the bed and within arm's reach of my bedside table. I pulled myself closer to the wooden bedside table, and within a great deal of effort, I managed to open the top drawer of the table, rummaging around and find the sheet of paracetamol before falling back into bed. I popped 2 tablets out into my hand and put them in my mouth, then swallowed the pills dry, as I couldn't face the pain of effort of reaching back across for the glass of water that lives on the bedside table. I don't know whether the paracetamol actually worked, or whether it was more of a placebo, but within half an hour, it seemed like the occasional spasm of pain had subsided. The constant ache remained, but without the sharp pain interrupting simple tasks. I actually managed to sit up in bed, and then I actually managed to stand up and walk to the bathroom. The walk from my bedroom to the bathroom was definitely uncomfortable. I soon found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, and I saw that my head and my nightshirt were covered in sweat, probably from my morning of intense pain. The other thing that I noticed was the small bump that was protruding from my lower stomach. I placed one hand onto the small lump and felt that it was quite solid, like a small coconut was living just under my skin's surface. I really didn't know what this meant. The pain I experienced, and now this strange lump. I was worried. The rest of the day was agony. The pain relief wore off after maybe an hour, and when I took more, it didn't really make much difference. The sharp shooting pain down my torso also returned, but this time, it came and went more frequently. Every minute or so, I would feel the sharp pain that felt like someone was trying to disembowel me. I didn't know what to do. Normally, I would call the doctor straight away, but every time that I tried to move or stand up, the searing pain would return and would render me useless, which doesn't help when you don't have your phone on you. Whenever the pain would come back, I would feel nothing, but the pain and the rest of my body would go limp, which wouldn't allow me to be able to do anything. The pain I was experiencing was of course concerning, but what frightened me even more was the lump on my stomach. I could actually see it growing. With each wave of pain that struck me, the lump on my stomach would begin to shake slightly, and I could see the skin stretch a little bit, and when the pain passed, I could tell that the lump was slightly larger. By dinner time that night, the lump had grown from the size of a small apple to the size of a grapefruit. I really didn't know what to do. I don't think there was really much that I could do. I didn't really have much of a choice but to sit there and watch my stomach grow. It must have been around 8 o'clock that night when I passed out because of pain. It had become too much, and my body must have shut down, because before I knew it, I was waking up the next morning. When I woke up, the first thing that I did was look down at my stomach and saw that it was now the size of a bowling ball. It had continued to grow throughout the night. The other thing that I noticed was that the pain was no longer there. I was pain-free that morning. I could stand up and walk, which is what I did. I called the doctor straight away and managed to get an appointment for later that day. I know I should have probably asked for an ambulance, but I didn't want to waste their resources just in case it was nothing too serious. I booked an appointment for 3 o'clock that afternoon, but at 2 o'clock, it started again. The intense pain and the growing of my stomach continued. Of course, this meant I couldn't make my appointment. I was standing when the pain first hit, so I collapsed to the floor, and that's where I remained for the rest of the day and throughout the night. The sharp pain would come and go every minute or so. I spent the day grimacing from the pain and looking down at my ever-growing stomach. It was during one of the pain spasms that I had an epiphany. It must be from the watermelon seed. The myth must be true. I must be growing a watermelon inside of my stomach. I couldn't think of anything that it could be, and I know that it sounds ridiculous, but it seemed to be the only explanation. I think I passed out earlier that night, and when I woke up the next morning, my stomach had grown significantly. It was now pretty much the size of a watermelon. The giant protrusion of my stomach stuck out, and I could see deep, purple stretch marks all across my stomach. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid. How was this even possible? And what do I do when it comes time to give birth to the melon? The pain was even more intense that day, and even though it didn't seem possible, my stomach continued to grow. By looking at the stretched skin across my stomach, it was a miracle that none of my skin had torn. The amount of stretching it had gone through in the past couple of days was enormous, and I wasn't sure how I hadn't split from my chest to my stomach. The large lump has remained the same size the past couple of days. It is now slightly larger than your average watermelon. The pain hasn't entirely gone, but it has gotten better over the past day or two. There's something that is worrying me though. I know that a giant lump in your stomach should be worrying enough. And trust me, it is. But something happened that concerned me more. Yesterday, for the first time, I felt the thing inside my stomach kick. Shout out to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacy, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I really look forward to making more content for everyone.